Good morning, grade 12. Today we are just going to focus on the summary of the short-run equilibrium positions for the monopoly. Remember, we said in the short run, it is possible for the monopoly to make an economic profit, an economic loss, or a normal profit. Okay, I want you to follow with me through this lesson because remember, for the normal profit, you only need to know the theory and all the things that relating to the graph, we are going to ignore that. Okay, so if we start with the definition first of all, the definition of an economic profit, we know by now, the economic profit is the profit that the entrepreneur will receive over and above his normal profit. So in the case of an economic profit, it means the entrepreneur is basically earning his normal profit, and on top of that, he also receives any excess profit that the business makes. All right, and remember, when the business makes an economic profit, it means that their revenue is more than his cost. Now, the monopolist's revenue is more than his costs. And when we refer to cost, we refer to both implicit and explicit costs. If you think back to the revision lesson at the beginning of chapter 6, we said that explicit costs are the actual expenditures of the business. So where there was a physical transaction, there was a transaction that took place, there was a source document to prove that that transaction happened, the transaction is recorded in the financial statements of the business, those are all explicit costs, things that was actually physically paid for. Your implicit costs is the opportunity cost for the entrepreneur's inputs in the production process. So, for example, the salary he could have earned if he worked for another business instead of running his own monopoly. All right, so the implicit cost basically refers to his normal profit, the kind of salary that he pays himself, the normal profit that he pays himself to keep him in the industry. It is part of his total cost. All right, so if the revenue is more than his implicit and explicit costs combined, then the business will make an economic profit. If we look at the economic loss, okay, obviously we said a monopoly will make an economic loss, just as in the perfect market, if his revenue is not enough to cover his costs. All right, so his total revenue is less than his total costs, or his average revenue is less than his average cost. Now, we did say when we discussed the equilibrium positions with the graphs that it is unlikely for the monopolist to make an economic loss, but it can happen. It is unlikely, but it can happen. All right, remember we said if, for example, his production costs increases drastically because he is more inefficient, because he's the only producer, the monopolist is inefficient, so he's not really producing at the lowest possible cost. If his production costs increases for whatever reason, or if the demand decreases to such an extent that it reduces his revenue. All right, so the minute that his revenue is less than his costs, and again with costs we mean explicit and implicit costs. All right, if his demand decreases for some reason, people are just not buying his product, then his revenue will obviously start decreasing. And if at the same time his costs are increasing, it can happen that the monopoly will make an economic loss. It shouldn't in theory, but it can happen. Eskom is proof that monopolies can actually make losses. All right, in terms of the normal profit, like any other market structure, the monopoly will make a normal profit when his revenue and his costs are equal. So when he basically breaks even, his revenue equals his costs. Just remember, in those costs, the cost, his total cost, includes his implicit cost, which is his normal profit. Now, remember, there's never no profit. It's either an economic profit or a normal profit, or then an economic loss. Okay, but when the business breaks even and its costs and revenue is basically the same, then we are going to say that he makes a normal profit because he still gets his remuneration, the entrepreneur, for his inputs in the production process. The next thing that we're going to look at is the demand curve. All right, now just remember, all of these equilibrium positions, we are still referring to the monopoly. So you will see all the information in all three of these columns are exactly the same. Okay, because in the monopoly, it doesn't matter if we're drawing an economic profit or economic loss or a normal profit, the shape of the demand curve is going to be exactly the same. Okay, because we are still in the same market structure. Now here we said that the demand curve for the monopoly has a negative slope because the monopoly is the only producer in this industry. So his demand curve represents the demand curve for the total industry, and the industry or the market demand curve always has a negative slope. All right, so the demand curve of the monopolist is the demand curve for the industry, the market demand curve, because he is the only one. All right, so there's nobody else that is going to contribute. The demand curve of him is also the demand curve of the total industry because he is the total industry. Then we also said, remember this is true in all the market structures, price always equals average revenue. So because average revenue is always the same as the price, your demand curve also represents your average revenue curve. However, because your demand curve has a negative slope, the implication of this is that the marginal revenue is not equal to the price. In the perfect market it was, but in the monopoly now, because his demand curve has a negative slope, this means that the marginal revenue is no longer equal to the price. We said that for the first unit, unit number 1, the price equals the marginal revenue, but every unit after that, your marginal revenue is less than the price, and this is why your marginal curve lies below your average revenue or your demand curve. Okay, now you'll see the information is the same for economic profit, economic loss, and the normal profit because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of a profit or loss the entrepreneur or the monopoly is making. His demand curve will look the same. Negatively sloping demand curve. The demand always represents the average revenue curve, and the marginal revenue curve is below your average revenue curve because your price is higher than your marginal revenue. All right, just for the sake of studying this information here in the last column, you can scratch out. You don't have to study that, although it's exactly the same as this. It doesn't really matter because remember, we are not going to draw a normal profit. It's not in your exam guideline, so we are not going to be doing things that is irrelevant to your exam. Okay, so although it's exactly the same as this, we can ignore the information on the normal profit because it will not be examined. Okay, I'm going to leave the calculation for last. Okay, I'll come back to that. I just want to talk about the location of the output level and the price. Right, so we said that in the perfect market, an individual producer has two choices. He has to firstly decide when he gets the market price. Remember, he's a price taker. He cannot determine the price. So in the perfect market, your individual producer literally only has to decide on his profit maximizing output. He has to decide, am I going to continue producing at the market price or am I going to shut down? That is his first choice. And his second choice is literally, if I'm going to continue production, how much am I willing to produce and sell at the current market price? But he cannot change the price. He only decides on a quantity. In the monopoly, this is completely different. Okay? In the monopoly, the monopolist is a price maker. So he is the one that has to determine the price. He has to decide on a price quantity combination where he will maximize his profits. All right, so first of all, what we need to do on the graph is we need to find your profit maximization point. All right, so obviously we need to find profit maximization. As I said to you, the profit maximization rule is not changing. In all market structures, profits are maximized where marginal cost and marginal revenue is equal. And again, except for the first unit, unit number 1, your marginal revenue is equal to the price, but every unit after that, your marginal revenue is always less than the price, and that is why your marginal revenue curve runs below your average revenue curve. Okay, now the rest of this information, you'll see it's the same for all the situations. Okay, exactly the same in all the table in the columns. Okay, I'm just going to skip ahead to the graph. Okay, all of this information now, it refers to the graph. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead to the graph for economic profit. Okay, that's the first one. This is your economic profit. So obviously the first thing that we need to do is we need to find profit maximization point. We know the rule. Profits are maximized where marginal revenue and marginal costs are equal. So on this graph, it happens at point A. Okay, just remember, finding profit maximization obviously is the easy part. Okay, always just remember it's not there. Okay, it's not where marginal cost intersects the demand curve or the average revenue curve. It is where my marginal revenue and my marginal cost intersect. Yeah, we make the bolletjie, we call it, in this case, point A. When you draw it, obviously, we're going to call it point E. Okay, now, at profit maximization point, as I said, the monopolist, he has to decide on a price-quantity combination. So he has to choose the price and the quantity where he will maximize profit. So his job is a bit more difficult than the individual producer in the perfect market. Remember what we said? This value here, you'll see it's not indicated even on the graph because this is like nothing information. We don't need this information. If there was a value here, it would indicate marginal revenue and marginal cost. We don't need to know what the value of marginal revenue and marginal cost is. We just need to know that this is where it is equal because this is where he will maximize his profit. Now, in order to find the price, we need to go up to the demand curve. All right. So from point A, we're going to go up, 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 not point C, because point C is on the average cost curve. We need to find up, 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 where we touch the demand curve. There at point B is the value of the price. What does your demand curve say? At point A, up, up, up. On the demand curve at point B, my price is 100 Rand. How much at 100 Rand? Now remember, he has to decide on a price and a quantity where he will maximize his profits. So obviously he will, the price, you go up, up, up on the demand curve, get 100. And we find the quantity where we always find it on the x-axis. So from my profit maximization point, I go down, down, down. And my profit maximizing output is 50. Okay. If we do the same for the economic loss graph, this one you will see now it has a AVC added in. I'm going to refer to AVC just now. Okay, but first thing that we need to do is we need to find the profit maximization point. We know that profits are maximized where marginal cost, the yellow graph, and marginal revenue, the light blue graph, where they are equal. So there where your marginal cost and your marginal revenue intersect, you're going to make your bolletjie. You are going to always call it point E. In this case, again, it is point A. All right. To find the price, not here. This is not the price. This is marginal revenue and marginal cost. From profit maximization, dotty, up, 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 up. Not at this point. This is my AVC. This is not what we're looking for. We find the price on the demand curve. So dotty, up, up, up. Here on point B, this is my demand curve. Now, this purple graph is my demand curve. So here by point B, it indicates the price, and the value of the price is 55 Rand. Profit maximizing output, the quantity, from profit maximization point, we go down to the axis, and the quantity is 50. All right, that you'll see it's all the information that it's in there. Okay, there it says the price is 100 Rand, output maximizing profit maximizing output is 50, and at the loss also it was 50, and then the price was 55. Now this information comes from the graph. All right, and then again, because we don't need to do the graph for normal profit, you can take all the information in the last column and you're going to scratch it out. Okay, you don't need to know how to do this. It's not difficult, but we don't need to do it. We're not going to waste time on doing stuff that is not covered in the guideline. If they're not going to ask it to you, then we don't bother. Okay, the next thing that we're going to look at is the adding of your average cost curve. Okay, so again, remember, it is the position of your average cost curve that is going to mean that you are making an economic profit, an economic loss, or a normal profit. All right. So the position of the average cost curve will determine profit or loss. Okay. Now again, if we go to the graph, which I'm going to do just now, obviously at my profit maximization point, I need to find what is the value of my average revenue, what is the value of my average cost, because that is going to indicate to me profit or loss. Okay, so I need to look at the positioning of the average cost curve in relation to my average revenue curve. Okay, so if we go ahead to the graph again, okay, this is my economic profit graph. So again, my profit was maximized at point A. We indicated that earlier, right? So at point A, I need to see what is my average revenue and what is my average cost. So from my profit maximization, I go up, dotiki, dotiki, dotiki. There's point C. Point C is on my average cost curve. So the value of my average cost is 75 Rand. And then if I continue to move upwards to point B is my point on my average revenue, my demand graph. The average revenue equals the price. So my average revenue is 100. My average cost is 75. My average revenue is 100. This means that my average revenue is higher than my average cost. We can also see the average cost curve is below my demand curve here at profit maximization point. And that means that this monopolist will be making an economic profit. Okay, what I want you to notice also, that is also important, and we'll discuss this in a subsequent essay question as well. We say that the monopoly is inefficient, productively inefficient. All right, to determine whether a business is productively efficient or not, we look at the average cost curve. Remember, this monopolist is going to choose to produce all along this vertical line. He chose to produce 50 units at a price of 100 Rand because this is where he maximizes his profit. The lowest point of the average cost curve, if you look carefully, it is here, where it intersects my marginal cost curve. This is the lowest point of my average cost. So here, where I'm producing, this monopoly is not producing at the lowest point of the average cost curve. The lowest point of average cost would be there. Let's say 70 units or whatever it would say there. That would be whether he would be productively efficient. Right, a firm is productively efficient if when they maximize their profits, it is at the lowest point of my average cost curve. The monopolist is not productively efficient because here where he's producing at point C, 50 units is what he would be producing. This is not the lowest point of the average cost curve. If we follow the average cost curve down, remember here where it intersects with marginal cost, this is the lowest point of average cost. It is slightly less than 75. Let's say it's 70 or whatever. Okay. So to determine whether a firm is productively efficient or not, we need to see there where they maximize their profits. Is this the lowest point of the average cost? And for the monopoly, the answer is always going to be no, it is not. Okay, the monopoly is inefficient, productively inefficient. All right, that is that's in the table as well. Now you don't have to write anything down. Okay, so I've showed you now on the graph how to find the value of average revenue and average cost. And I explained productive efficiency. It's not producing at the lowest point of the average cost curve. If we go now to the next graph, the economic loss graph, okay, you will see in this graph they've added the AVC. There's a reason for this. The minute that you see AVC, you think shutdown. AVC is only important when we talk about the shutdown rule. The first thing that we need to determine is whether or not this monopolist, if he's making an economic profit or an economic loss. Okay, so again, we're going to start with profit maximization point. All right, at my profit maximization point, where marginal cost and marginal revenue intersect, we said this is at point A. We now need to see where is my average revenue, where is my average cost, to determine if he's making a profit or a loss. So from my profit maximization point, I'm going to go up, up, up. Okay, remember here where it intersects AVC. AVC does not determine profit or loss. So we're going to ignore this. It doesn't have a value in any case in this graph, but we're going to ignore it. We go up, up, up. You're on point B. It's on the demand graph, on your average revenue graph. So your average revenue is 55 Rand, equal to the price. Then if we continue upwards, there to point C, this is where we are on the average cost curve. So my average cost is 75 Rand. So in this case, we can see that the average revenue is 55 Rand. The average cost is 75 Rand. So my average revenue is less than my costs. My revenue is not enough to cover my costs. And therefore, this business, this monopolist will make an economic loss. We can also see at profit maximization all along this line. This is profit maximization. All along this line or at this specific point, my average cost graph is above my average revenue graph. Okay, so because the average cost is higher, he's going to make an economic loss. And again, we can see that the monopoly is productively inefficient. This graph shows it a bit better. All right, productive efficiency will happen here. Okay, this is where my average cost is at its lowest point, but this monopolist is not going to choose to produce at these output levels. He has chosen to produce at these output levels. All right, so here by point C, where his average cost is 75, it is possible for him to still decrease his average costs quite a bit. All right, he's not producing on the lowest point of the average cost curve, so he is productively inefficient. All right, if we just quickly talk about shutdown, remember, as I said, if you see ABC, immediately you need to think shutdown. You're not automatically going to say this firm is going to shut down. You have to look. All right, remember the first thing we look for is the average cost and the average revenue. If a producer makes an economic loss, then and only then will they consider shutdown. Okay, we've already determined that this monopolist is making an economic loss. So now we need to see, is he going to shut down or not? Now, remember your shutdown rule. Hopefully, you know it by now. Any firm will shut down if the price or the average revenue is less than the average variable cost. In this case, there's my profit maximization point. My price is 55 Rand. My average revenue, 55 Rand. My average variable cost is way lower than my average revenue. In this case, he will not shut down. All right, because my average revenue is still higher than my average variable cost. Remember, if my average revenue is not enough to pay for the average variable cost, he will shut down. If this average variable cost curve was there, okay, if it was there above my demand curve, it would run there, then this firm would have shut down, in theory. Okay, in theory, then this firm would shut down, because then my price would be here, and my AVC would be somewhere in between B and C, if the graph was there. It's not. It is here at the bottom. So this particular firm will not shut down. I just want to make a side note here. Shutdown is something that generally only happens in the perfect market. You can apply the theory in the monopoly, yes, the theory stays the same. But remember, the purpose of shutdown in the perfect market. In a perfect market, each individual producer is a price taker. He cannot change the price. So if that price that the market gives him is so low that he cannot cover his average variable cost, your individual producer can't fix it in a perfect market because they're a price taker. They shut down temporarily so that the market can fix the price. In a monopoly like this, he's a price maker. So if the price is too low for him to cover his average variable cost, he can change the price. Now, remember, it's up to him. He can totally change the price. He will choose what he wants the price to be. He can shift his supply curve in order to change the price. So it doesn't help for him to shut down temporarily while the market has to fix the price. He is the market. He is supposed to fix the price. So by shifting his demand curve, he will be able then to increase the price so that it's higher than his AVC, and then he won't shut down. Now he will eliminate the economic losses in the short run by changing the price because he has market power. He can do this. All right. Obviously, if they give you a graph with an AVC, you need to apply the average variable cost. But just know in practice, monopolies will not shut down. Temporarily shut down, they will not do. If they make a loss and they cannot fix the loss, in a monopoly, the entrepreneur will simply close down the business, not shut down, close down the business, liquidate the business, take his investment out and go and make an investment elsewhere. So the monopoly will just cease to exist in the long run. Okay. But as I said, if they give you the ABC and you need to apply the shutdown rule, you do that. Just remember, a firm will only shut down if he's not able to pay his average variable cost. All right. So in this case, as I said, the AVC lies below the demand curve, so he will not shut down. If the AVC curve is higher than the demand curve at profit maximization point, then we can make a case for shutdown. Okay, just quickly the normal profit. Okay, remember we don't do anything relating to the graph, so this information you can also pretty much scratch out. Okay. The last thing that I just want to do quickly is the calculations. All right. Remember, there's different ways to calculate. There are two different ways to calculate the economic profit or the economic loss. So on this graph, the first thing that we need to do, again, find profit maximization. At point A, we've already established this is where he will maximize his profit. So if we want to calculate the total revenue, we're going to take price times quantity. My price, I go up, up, up. There on the demand curve. My price in this case is 100 Rand. My quantity, profit maximizing output is 50. So total revenue will be 100 times 50. My total cost is going to be my average cost times the quantity. So at my profit maximization, I go up, up, up. Here on point C, this is what's indicating the average cost. My average cost is 75 Rand. And then 75 times the quantity of 50, that will give me my total cost. And then I just take total revenue and I minus total cost, and that gives me the value for total economic profit. Or the alternative method, which is not in this table, but you know about it, we take economic profit per unit. Again, we take average revenue, which is equal to the price, so 100, minus the average cost at point C, which is 75. That is 25 Rand profit per unit. But he doesn't just sell one. Remember, he sells 50. So that 25 Rand per unit times the 50 is going to give me the total profit. Okay, if you go back up again, we skip this, remember. There we go. There is your calculation. I did it in one step like we did it in class also. Remember, you can split it up. You can calculate total revenue separately and then total cost separately, and then just calculate the profit after that. Okay, or you can use the other method, economic profit per unit. Just remember to multiply by the quantity at the end. All right, it refers to the shaded area here. You will see, I don't know in your textbook, I can't think now, but on my graph, I forgot to do the shading. Okay, so I will not get marks for the shading. Remember, your shaded area is the rectangle there. Okay, when we draw it, we normally do the dotted keys, not the solid lines, right? So you're just going to shade this area. You can shade it in your textbook if it's not shaded. All right. Then if we look at the economic loss, okay, the calculation of the economic loss, again at profit maximization, which is point A, we need to find what is my average revenue, what is my average cost. Total revenue, we want to calculate price times quantity. So point A, we need to go up, 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 not here, up, 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 up to point B on the demand curve. My price is 55 Rand. So 55 times the quantity of 50 will give me my total revenue. To calculate the total cost, same thing. I go from point A up, 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 but now to my average cost graph on point C. My average cost is 75 Rand times by the quantity of 50. If I want to do it the other way, economic loss per unit, obviously my average revenue is the same as the price, so 55 minus my average cost, which is 75, gives me a 20 Rand loss per unit. But I'm not just selling one, I'm selling 50. So the 20 times the 50 is going to give me the loss. All right, the calculation is earlier on. There we go. Okay, calculate total revenue, calculate total cost. And if we do the calculation, it is 1,000 Rand loss. Remember, the minus indicates your loss. Okay, obviously you can also do it in the other way. as I did explain in class, you have the example in your book. All right, again, for the normal profit, we are not going to apply this to the graph, so you can scratch that out. Okay, and then lastly, if we go to the graphs quickly, the first graph obviously is very important. That's economic profit. The second graph is economic loss. We've worked with that one. The last graph of the normal profit, once again, you're going to take your pen and you're going to scratch this out completely. All right, it must be obliterated, not a light little delicate pencil line. You scratch this out 100%. You leave no imagination, nothing left over to the imagination. You scratch it out. You can even write there for yourself. We don't have to be able to draw the normal profit. Ignore this graph. Okay. And then just before the end of this lesson, okay, let's just look at the conclusion. Obviously, we said the monopoly makes an economic profit if his average cost is less than his average revenue. So the average cost curve is below my average revenue curve at the profit maximization point. Okay, but what is important now, remember this is a summary of the short run equilibrium positions. In the monopoly, there is barriers to entry. There are barriers to entry. So it is impossible for anybody else to enter this industry. Entry is completely blocked. There's either artificial barriers or there's natural barriers, but it is impossible for anybody to enter this industry. Remember, in the perfect market, economic profit was possible in the short run, but not possible in the long run. And the reason for that was the freedom of entry and exit. As soon as your perfect competitor makes economic profits, other entrepreneurs entered the industry and his market share decreased. Their prices and everything decreased, which reduced his economic profit into a normal profit. In the monopoly, this is not possible because entry is blocked. New entrepreneurs would love to enter this industry when the monopoly makes economic profit. They would love to be a part of this industry. They would love to steal his market share away, but they can't because entry is blocked. Okay, so the theory says that a monopoly will be able to make an economic profit in the short run, but also in the long run. You will see any industry, any market structure where there's freedom of entry and exit, economic profits will be in the short run, but not in the long run. And any market structure where entry into the market is impossible or difficult, economic profits will be made both in the short run and in the long run. So for the monopoly, in theory, they will make an economic profit even in the long run as well, as long as his demand is still there. Okay, so the people don't stop buying his product. Obviously, he cannot make a profit if nobody buys his product. So provided that people keep buying his product and the demand is still there, that will help the revenue to still be there. And as long as his production costs stays the same. Obviously, if his production cost increases suddenly, it can take his economic profits away in the short run, but he's obviously able to fix it for the long run. Okay, so it is possible for him to make an economic profit always because he has market power, because there's barriers to entry. Nobody can enter his industry. He will make a profit as long as his demand is there, people keep buying his product, and his costs doesn't increase too much. Okay, if we look at the conclusion for the economic loss, we obviously said that a monopoly will make an economic loss if his average cost is more than his average revenue. So at profit maximization point, his average cost is above the average revenue graph. An economic loss for the monopoly is only possible in the short run. Okay, a monopoly will not make, in theory, will not make an economic loss in the long run because again he has market power. If he's making an economic loss, he's going to make use of his market power. He's going to change the price. He can push the price up, he can push the price down. It is totally within his power. He will change that price so that he can make an economic profit in the long run. So a loss can happen in the short run, but it shouldn't happen in the long run. If they ask you what is the long run equilibrium position for the monopoly, you're going to say economic profit. Okay, we have discussed the ABC curve. If his average variable cost is more than his average revenue, in theory, he will shut down. Okay, but remember, I did talk about shutdown. In theory, he will shut down. In reality, a monopoly is not going to shut down and wait for the market to fix the price because he's the market. He has to fix the price. Okay, for as long as the average variable cost curve is below your demand curve at profit maximization point, he will not shut down. Okay, but as minute that his average variable cost goes above the demand curve, then he will obviously shut down in theory. Okay, and then this last little section, okay, you can leave this, you can study this, okay, it's part of the theory. A monopoly obviously makes a normal profit if my average cost curve is tangent to the demand curve. In other words, my average cost is equal. All right, you can add that in. Okay, my average cost equals my average revenue at the profit maximization point. All right, we never drew the graph. Okay, so don't worry about the tangent part, okay, that you can scratch out, that you don't need to know. We know this from the perfect market, but still, okay, but if average cost and average revenue is equal, and the only time that this is possible, again, is for the short run. In the long run, the theory says monopoly will make an economic profit because of his market power. He's not going to be satisfied with making a normal profit. He will manipulate the market so that he can make an economic profit. All right, and that is the end of today's lesson.